I'm Nate. I'm 32 years old, and before this happened, I loved nature. I spent most of my life traveling, hiking, and camping. But now even the sound of a dry leaf rustling under my feet makes me freeze. I have nightmares every night, and it all started with that damn weekend at a lake that wasn't on any map. There were 4 of us: me, Derek, my friend from college, Jill, my fiancée at the time, and his sister Hannah. It was an event we had been counting down the minutes to. A 3-night camp in the woods of Washington, far from the city, people, internet, and cell phones. Perfect planning, professional equipment, and great spirits. But no one knew that I was the only one who would return from that forest. Derek had found a strange place on his GPS. It was a place that had been registered on old maps, but now it wasn't on Google Maps. Only the name remained: Stillwater Lake. It was raining something from the very name. Not silent, silent, as if something was waiting in that lake. First day, Thursday, we set off from Seattle. 6 hours of driving and 2 hours of hiking. The air was clean and cool. The leaves were orange and red. Everything was perfect. The path was difficult, but we were full of energy. The GPS only worked up to a certain point. Then we had an old map that Derek had printed out. That's where the first warning sign came. An old sign was installed next to the wooden path. It said in faded colors, "Private land, do not enter." But underneath it was added by hand. Not because of humans, but because of what's left. We laughed. We thought it was a hiker's joke. Maybe someone was trying to create a scary atmosphere, like in 80s horror movies. But now that I think about it, maybe that was the only warning we really should have listened to. After 2 hours of hiking on side trails and through a rocky canyon, we reached the lake. Our eyes sparkled. The water was so clear that it looked like no waves had ever hit it. Not even a bird was perched on it. There was a heavy silence. A silence that felt like it was watching you. "It's like it doesn't breathe here," Hannah said. We set up camp by the lake. We were tired but excited. We lit a fire the first night, told stories, and laughed. But at 2 in the morning, for the first time that night, a sound came. The sound of something breathing, but it was much bigger than a person. Jill said the wind was coming, but not a leaf moved. Even the water in the lake was still. And then the sound suddenly stopped. As if he understood. We heard him. We didn't see anything that night, but I was awake until morning. Day 2, Friday. In the morning, a small footprint was seen around the tents, like an animal's footprint, but it seemed to be walking standing up. It had 4 fingers, like a human hand, but it was tiny, almost like a child's hand. Derek took a picture. He said it might be a raccoon, but there was no trace of it coming or going. It just made a circle around our tent, as if it were watching us. Jill said she had a dream about a little girl standing by the lake with wet feet, her back to us, her hair covering her face. She said she couldn't breathe until the little girl turned around and her eyes had no eyes. We said it was a dream, a nightmare of exhaustion. But from that moment on, I felt something had changed. The trees weren't pretty anymore. The shadows were very long. Even at 3 in the afternoon, the light was fading. When we went to gather firewood, Hannah found something, an old wooden box half buried by a tree. When we opened it, it was full of old photos of families by this lake. But the dates on the back of the photos were from the 1950s. And in all of them, there was a little girl in a white dress, standing behind the families. There was no face in any of them, blurred or cut out, or maybe. Evening of the second day, Friday, after finding that wooden box, the atmosphere changed. Jill, Hannah, and Derek no longer had those jokes and smiles of the first trip. Jill didn't say anything anymore. He just looked at the lake with empty eyes sometimes. Hannah said a sentence that will forever remain in my mind. If this lake is alive, it's calling us. I asked her not to say that, but deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. Near sunset, Derek decided to inflate the inflatable boat he had brought with him. He wanted to take some pictures of the middle of the lake. He said maybe we could sell the pictures to nature magazines. We were against it. Jill didn't say anything at all. Hannah said it was getting dark, but Derek was stubborn. He inflated the boat with a lot of force. The water of the lake was so still that there was not even a small wave. It was the strangest silence I had ever heard. When he got on the boat, it was as if the lake had taken a moment to breathe. The boat set off. Derek reached the middle of the lake. It wasn't far, maybe 50 meters. They raised the camera, took a few pictures, and then suddenly, a scream. Not Derek's voice, nor anyone else's. A loud, low, thin scream, like a child's scream, from the middle of the lake. We ran to the water's edge. Derek was standing there looking down. His boat suddenly tilted, as if something had moved beneath him. He shouted, "Underneath me, something is moving the boat." But the water was not a wave. The boat was moving, but the surface of the lake was smooth. Like glass. There was a crash. Derek tried to row, but it seemed to be stuck. We just watched, motionless, until the boat turned. 1 second, Derek was there, screaming. Next, the empty boat spun in the middle of the water. Derek was gone. There was no sound. The water didn't move. There was nothing, just a floating inflatable boat in a lake that never boils. Night 2, Friday night. We were shocked. We couldn't believe it. Every moment we thought Derek would come out of the trees and laugh, say, "We've got you covered." But he didn't. We had a satellite phone, but it didn't work. From the moment we entered the area around the lake, there was no signal. Jill was just sitting by the fire, staring at the lake. I went back to the tent to get the map, but to find a way out faster. When I returned, Hannah was standing. Her finger was extended towards the lake. I heard her trembling voice. "That girl is there, in the middle of the water. Well, she's looking." I narrowed my eyes. I saw nothing, just the reflection of the moon. But Hannah insisted. "Her hair is wet. She's getting closer. Nate, she's not real." Suddenly, Jill stood up and walked towards the water like a dreamer. I shouted, "Jill, no." But she didn't answer. She went into the water. She was freezing, but she didn't seem to mind. She just walked, slowly and silently, up to her knees, up to her waist. I reached behind her. I wanted to pull her out. She grabbed my hand and said, "She's calling me. She says Derek is there, under the water." She said it so calmly that my hair stood on end. Hannah screamed, "No, Jill, it's not you. The one calling you. It's not you." I pulled her out with force. Her body was cold. Her lips were blue, but she was still saying that the girl was there. She was saying that Derek was still alive. We just had to find her. And that night, we heard footsteps. Not from around, not from behind, but from inside the tents. Midnight, Friday. When we got back to the tent, it was as cold as a refrigerator. Although the fire was still burning, there was no heat. Jill was asleep, but not in a normal sleep. Her eyelids fluttered, and she occasionally whispered Derek's name. Hannah asked me to go away from the tent area with her. I had to see something. About 100 meters from the camp, near a very old, gnarled tree, Hannah had found something buried. Under the damp soil, a rusty metal box. When we opened it, it was an old leather-bound notebook. The inscription was written in a faded pen. Elijah Moore, 1954. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, you're not supposed to be here. Silent Lake is not a natural place. We residents made a mistake by building around it." The sound of a child screaming from the water at night. That girl is still there. The further we went, the more irregular and frightening the writing became. A paragraph from the third page. We were a family of 5 who settled here. In 53, a little girl named Amelia drowned in the lake. They said she threw herself into it because her mother wanted to remarry. But after that, nothing was the same. Dogs would disappear. Fires would go out. Children would walk in their sleep and go into the water as if someone were calling them. In one of the last posts, Emily gets closer every night. The first time I saw her was only in the water mirror. Later, behind the tent. Then, in the tent. Now there's only one way left. I mustn't let anyone come here again. Hannah and I looked at each other. Our hearts were beating like drums. Hannah said, "That girl is still here. Derek might still be alive, or at least his soul." From that night on, the voices grew louder. When we returned to camp, we heard the sound of chains. It was like something iron was being dragged across the ground. But there was nothing. I passed a tree. I stood under it, and suddenly I realized that tree has no shadow. It was a full moon. There was shadow everywhere, except for that tree. Even I had a shadow, but not him. A shadowless black trunk. That's where I felt someone breathing behind me. I turned slowly. There was no one, but on the trunk of the tree, I had just seen it. Wet fingerprints. Midnight, Friday to Saturday. It was about 3 in the morning. The sound of the lake was as still as ever, dead and still. The air was heavier than ever, as if the oxygen had been depleted. Jel was still asleep, deep and motionless. But something about her body was not right. When I shone the flashlight on her face, I saw that her lips were parted and she was humming. I listened. She wasn't humming, she was singing. It was a children's song, a melody we had heard 100 times since we were kids on the swings. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, with the same childish tone, the same tone, the same damn calm, but with her eyes closed, and her face was frozen. Hannah woke up and said, "That poem, I've heard it here before." We tried to wake Jel, but her eyes wouldn't open. He didn't move. All he did was raise his hand and point his finger at the lake. At that moment, the sound came. At first, I thought it was coming from my tent, but then I realized it was coming from Derek's backpack. I unzipped it and took out his little recorder. Derek used to record sounds from nature. I pressed the play button, and the sound played. Not the sound of a bird, not the sound of the wind, not our voices, but a girl, in a muffled and scratchy voice, said this on the recording. "You're back. You're finally back. Why did it take so long? I'm still here, right down here, just one step away from me." Hannah's voice trembled. It's the same girl's voice. Amelia. And the recording turned off by itself, without anyone touching it. 4 a.m. The sounds hadn't stopped. We couldn't sleep, so we sat outside by the fire. Jel was still in the tent. 10 minutes later, we heard the sound of the tent zipping. We turned back. Jel wasn't there. The place was empty. The sleeping bag was empty. Only his pillow was left, which was still warm. We ran around the camp. The sounds were lost in the thick fog, but a sound like a child's laughter was coming from the lake. We ran to the shore, and we saw him. Jel was standing in the middle of the lake, not on a boat, not on a stick, on the water, as if the water were frozen underfoot. He was singing the same song again, in a flat, monotonous voice. "Ashes, ashes, we all fall." I shouted, "Jel, come back. You're sleepwalking." But he just smiled, and he looked down, and just as we were walking towards him, suddenly, he went down, slowly, silently. like a stone sinking slowly into water. We hit the water, looking for his footprints. There was nothing, not even a wave, just a footprint on the water. 5 a.m., thicker fog than ever. After Gel's disappearance, Hannah was in a state of shock. She didn't speak, she didn't blink. She just stayed at the lake. There was still no sound of waves. Not even a bubble had come out of where Gel had sunk. It was as if nothing had happened. We both returned to the fire, wet and shivering. But that fire had also gone out now. For no reason. I decided to look for help or a way out in the forest. The phones had no antenna since the day before. But in my mind, the voice of that girl, Amelia, still echoed. After 10 minutes of walking in the fog, a building appeared through the tall, old trees. No, I'd better say a square shadow. I walked forward. The fog cleared, and I saw an old, torn tent abandoned in the middle of the trees. It was very old. Its ropes were rotten. The cloth was covered in dirt and dry leaves, and it smelled sour. I approached cautiously. The tent was open, and inside, a cassette tape and a dusty voice recorder. My hand shook. I brought it with me to the camp. I replaced the old batteries and pressed the play button. A man's voice came on, slow and choppy. "This is Elijah Moore. If you're listening to this, you've found him. If you're thinking of going into the water to follow the voice, don't go. That girl is no longer human. She's a ghost looking for attention, looking for someone to take her place." And then another voice came in, a childish, scratchy voice that said, "You promised not to leave me alone, but everyone else left. Now it's your turn." Then the recording abruptly stopped. Hannah and I looked at each other. Cold sweat dripped from our foreheads. Just then, the sound of *** wet feet on leaves ** came from behind. I turned. Derek was there, but not like before. His skin was pale. His eyes were white and empty. His clothes were wet, as if he had just stepped out of the water. He said, "Don't come back. Hannah, he chose you. Don't let it be too late." And he disappeared, soundless, like vapor. Chapter 7, Amelia's Shadow. 6 a.m. The fog still holds. A few minutes later, Hannah disappeared. Soundless, no trace. I only heard a laugh. I turned around, and he was gone. Only his hat remained, stuck to a branch. But there was something else there. On the trunk of a nearby tree, a sentence was written in blood. "We all fall." The sound of the lake had returned, but not in the form of waves. A whispering sound, from under the water, as if hundreds of people were repeating something at the same time under the water's surface. "Come back to us. Come back to us." 6:45 a.m. The forest around the lake. Just when I thought there was no one left, I heard a voice. No whispering, no sound of the lake. Hannah's voice. It was coming from the direction of the old tent. I ran back to the same place, but now the tent was gone. It was as if it had never been there. There was only a small hole left in the middle of the damp soil, full of standing water. The voice came from the pit. "Come down. We're here. We were like you looking for the rest of us." I knelt down. I looked at the surface of the pit. In the water, it wasn't my image, but it was Amelia's image, staring at me. Her face was wet, with eyes that were no longer human. Her skin was pale and her lips were sewn with black thread. The image whispered softly, "You're going to take my place. I'll stay free. You'll stay down here." A moment later, hands emerged from the water. Childlike, bony, cold hands. They grabbed my shoulders, as if they were trying to pull me down. But before I drowned, something sparked in my mind. That old tape recorder. The tape. I took it out of my backpack. The hands were still around my shoulders. I pressed the bridge button. The same man's voice, Elijah Moore, played again. If you get to the lake and it wants you, just say one thing. I don't belong here. You belong here. I'll take my life back. I said loudly. I don't belong here. You belong here. I'll take my life back. For a moment, everything was silent. The hands withdrew. The voices faded. The fog began to disperse. The sun was rising. I opened my eyes. I was lying in the dirt, alone. No one was around. The camp had disappeared. Only the smell of smoke and dirt remained. The lake, now like a smooth mirror, said nothing. I set off. My watch was still ticking. 6 hours had passed. After a few kilometers, I finally found a road. A car stopped. It was a local driver. He asked, "Where are you from?" I said, "The camp by the silent lake." His face turned pale. He said, "Boy, it's been closed for 50 years. After a few teenagers disappeared. A little girl. I think her name was Amelia. A few months later, I went back to the place. But no matter how much I looked, there was no sign of the camp. Not of the lake. Not of the old tent. Even the route had changed. All I saw was a wooden sign, written in faint handwriting. We all fall down. My name is Eric. I'm from Denver, and I've spent most of my life camping and hiking in the mountains and forests. Whenever life gets tough, I always step into nature to find myself again. In the winter of 2022, after a major breakup, I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains of Montana. There was an old trail suggested on one of the forums, a trail for hunters and rangers from the 70s. I bought the map from an old guy in a log cabin. He said only one thing. If you get to shelter number 9, don't stay there for the night. Even the rangers don't go that way anymore. I thought he was joking. It was some kind of local legend. But now that I'm writing this, I swear I wish I had taken him seriously. The first day started with the trial. The weather was cold but bearable. The wind howled through the pine trees like silent whispers that seemed to have been there for centuries. 3 hours after we started, my phone's signal completely went out. According to the map, a wooden shelter called Number 9 should have been at the end of the first day's trail. The map said it belonged to rangers who patrolled the forest in the 1970s. It's no longer in use, but it's still standing. I reached it by dusk. The shelter stood in the middle of a clearing in the forest. All but sturdy. Wooden door, broken window, rusty chimney. When I entered, there was a strange smell in the air. Not mold, more like very, very old damp dirt. As if you were in a place where no one had breathed for a long time. Inside was a wooden table, a broken bed, and a metal chest in the corner of the room. When I opened it, I found a cloth notebook inside. It read, 1976 Patrol Office, JH. I flipped through the pages. Most of them were the Ranger's daily notes. But one note, written in red ink, stood out from the rest. February 23rd, 1976. A sound came from behind the wall. It sounded like someone was walking in the woods. But there was nothing outside. I won't sleep again until I find him. I remembered what the old man had said. Don't stay there overnight. But the sky was dark, and the way back was more dangerous. I said just one night. Nothing could scare a nature hiker like me. But I was wrong. The night brought something else with it. That night, I slept on the floor in a corner of the shelter with a flashlight. The old heater had broken down, and there was no particular warmth in the room. A coldness had seeped into my bones, not just from the air, but from the wood itself. It was almost 1 a.m. when I woke up to a dry, weak sound. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was coming from inside the wall opposite. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a squirrel or a raccoon is trapped. But the sound was strange. It sounded like someone banging their hand. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 more knocks, and silence again. I got up. I had my flashlight. I walked cautiously to the wall and pressed my ear to the wood. There was nothing. Suddenly, just as I was about to pull back, 3 knocks came from the other side of the wall, exactly where my ear was pressed. I froze. I jumped back. My heart was pounding in my chest. He whispered something, softly, cautiously, like a whisper from the bottom of a well. Open it. Let me out. It's cold here. I went to the exit door. I wanted to run away, but no matter what I did, the door wouldn't open. There was no lock, but it seemed to have been taken from the outside. My feet were frozen. In the light of the flashlight, I saw that the wall in front of me was starting to swell. It seemed like something was pushing outwards from inside the wall. At that moment, my flashlight flashed and went out. In the darkness, the sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. It was pitch black. My hand searched for the flashlight on the ground, but the ground was so cold it felt like it was frozen. I wasn't sure if this cold was just from the air, a sickly cold, like something that comes from a corpse. The sound was still coming. Now not just 3 knocks, but scratching, pounding, and a kind of wiggling, as if someone was crawling through the wooden wall, like a worm. My breathing was rapid. I couldn't escape. The door wasn't locked, but it wouldn't open. Behind me was just the wall, the sound, and that damned whisper. No one found me. You're different. Suddenly, something came out of the wall. Some kind of thing between a finger and a rotten branch. It came out of the wooden joint with a sound, as if skin was being torn. I screamed and stepped back. My body hit a wooden chair and I fell. I accidentally pulled the emergency torch out of my backpack with my hand. I turned it on. Its yellow, flickering light fell on the wall. There, in the middle of the wood, was a face. The face of someone who seemed to have been buried in that same wood a long time ago. Dry, rotten, but its eyes were still open, and it was looking. Her lips moved. You can open the door. Just 1 knock. Just once. Another voice came from behind me. Footsteps. I turned, but there was no one. I turned to the wall, but the face had disappeared. Only broken wood and a deep gash. Now, something was whispering in my mind, not with a voice, but as if it had injected itself into my thoughts. They buried him alive because he saw. I didn't sleep again that night until morning. I grabbed the emergency torch from the wall and sat down with my back to the wall. I didn't know if what I saw was really in the wall or an illusion of fear, but there was still the mark of the broken wood on the wall. I still smelled the rotting dirt, and I still felt like someone was watching me. Near morning, when the cold, silver sunlight streamed in through the broken window, I decided to get out of the shelter no matter what. But first, I went to the metal box again. The old notebook was still there. I started reading it again, more carefully. On the next pages, there were things written that I hadn't noticed the last time. February 10th, 1976. A local hunter found a man in the woods wearing a ranger's uniform, but no one knew who he was. They say he lived in Shelter 9, but his name is not on any list. He said, "I know what they did. I saw it." When the police came after him, he ran into the woods. He was never seen again. Only his blood trail led to the side of the shelter. February 16th, 1976. One of the rangers disappeared. The night before, he said he heard voices from the wall. We laughed. The next day, His bed was empty. The door was locked. There's no sign of him. February 22nd, 1976. I heard a voice, too. I'm leaving. If you find this, go. Don't let him out. When I looked up, the sun was in the middle of the sky. I decided with all my heart to get out of that damn door. I closed my pack, pushed the door open, and this time, the door opened easily. Nothing had stopped it. But the night before, I couldn't open it. Why? It was as if someone or something didn't want me to go. Or worse, wanted me to stay there until the next night. I rushed out of the shelter. The morning light filtered through the trees, creating a strange atmosphere. Neither bright nor dark, a kind of poisonous gray. The leaves were wet, and there was a smell of damp wood everywhere. But what stopped me were the footprints on the soft dirt in front of the shelter door. A pair of footprints that led straight to the door, but no sign of an exit. No sign of a return. No sign of a departure. They had just come to the door. I muttered, "When? Or what?" I looked around. The trees were silent. There was no sound of a bird. Even the sound of the wind had stopped. Everything was too quiet, like before an explosion or something bad happened. I headed south, the main route back to camp. But less than half an hour later, I saw something strange. The sign I had seen the night before had now turned in the opposite direction. The sign read, "Base Camp, 5 miles." But now the same sign had been reversed and was pointing north, the same direction as the shelter. As I came closer, thinking maybe I was wrong, I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned around. There was no one there, but I felt something, a shadow, a being, watching me through the trees. Not with my eyes, but with a kind of presence, like when you feel someone behind you in the dark. I started running, but no matter how far I ran, the path was unfamiliar. My map said I was getting away from the camp, but I had kept going straight. It was as if the forest itself was spinning me. So let's go into the darkness. After hours of wandering, just as despair was squeezing my heart, a building appeared in the distance in the gray fog of the forest. At first, I thought it was a hut, but the closer I got, the more I saw it was a church, a small, rotting wooden church with broken windows and a fallen cross in front of it. There were no roads, signs, or landmarks around it. There was no reason for something like that to be in the middle of the forest. I approached the door. The rotting wood creaked underfoot. I cautiously opened the door. It was dark inside the church, but the strong smell of date, burnt wood, and something like rotting meat permeated the air. The pews were broken. The altar was cracked. But what caught my eye most of all was a mural behind the altar. A painting showing a shelter with the number 9. My feet went weak. What was here? Why was there a picture of shelter number 9 in the church? I couldn't believe it. I moved closer. I put my hand on the wall. Behind the peeling paint of the painting, I felt something hollow. I knocked. The sound was hollow. With pressure, a section of the wall opened. A stone staircase led down. The light from my torch fell into it. It was as if my own breath had returned to my lungs. I went down with fear and hesitation. The stairs were narrow and the walls were wet. When I reached the end of the path, I came to a small stone room, full of dust and cobwebs. There was a broken table in the middle, and on the table was a very old notebook and a map. The map showed 9 forest shelters. All of them were marked with numbers, but only one of them was crossed out in red ink. Number 9. And at the bottom of the map, a sentence was written in a crooked and shaky handwriting. He is still here, a prisoner in the wall, waiting for someone to open the door. I put the map in my backpack. I took the notebook and climbed up from the basement. When I reached the top floor, the sky was grayer than before. The sound of the wind was howling through the trees. But beneath the sound of the wind, I heard a voice that made my hair stand on end. A child's whisper, a voice, emotionless, quiet, as if it was singing a song. It wasn't in the church. It was coming from the trees, from the direction of the forest. I went outside. The leaves rustled under my feet. Step by step, I got closer to the sound. But every time it sounded, it was heard from another direction. It seemed to be spinning around me. Suddenly, there was silence. And then, something breathed beside me. I turned. There was no one. But on the skin of my neck, the warmth of the thing's breath remained. I started running. Aimless, just getting away from there. But no matter how much I ran, the forest didn't change. The trees were like a repeating image. No, worse, as if they were moving themselves. My foot slipped. I fell. My head hit the tree trunk. I was unconscious for a few moments. When I came to, it was dark. The torch was on. The map was lying on the ground. Next to the map, the notebook was open. And the page that was open now was a page I had never seen before. February 27th, 1976. I saw him. He is not a man. He is not nature. He is not a memory. He is a crack that feeds on fear and pain. He is not seen with the eyes, only with presence. Anyone who enters Vault 9 is seen. And once you are seen, there is only one way. Either you become part of the wall, or you open the door for him. My knees shook. I felt something slowly entering my mind. A ringing voice echoed in my head. One blow, just one more blow. The torchlight fell on the ground, and at that moment, a muddy trail formed right behind me. I got up from the ground, my legs weak and my heart pounding. I closed the notebook, picked up the map, and whispered silently, "There's only one way. I have to go back there. That damned bunker." I found my way back with the help of the faint moonlight and the compass in my watch. But something was different. The trees had shifted, not noticeably, but invisibly and gradually, like a theater scene with a slowly changing background. After hours of walking, the white light of the window of bunker number 9 finally appeared through the fog. As I got closer, I felt the air getting heavier. The sounds were muffled, like when you breathe underwater. The door to the bunker was still closed, but on the wooden wall next to the door, a note had been carved with a knife. "He won't wake up until you open it." I held my breath. My hands were shaking. I slowly opened the door. Everything was just as I had left it, except for one thing. On the table in the middle of the bunker, there was a dusty suitcase. I didn't even remember it being there before. I went closer. It didn't have a lock. I opened the door. Inside, there was an old tape recorder, a cassette tape, and a yellow note. I picked up the note. It read in messy handwriting, "If you want to understand why number 9 shouldn't have been opened, listen to the tape. But I warn you, after you hear it, you won't be able to live a normal life again." My hands were frozen. I put the tape in the recorder. I hit the play button. A man's voice began to speak. A dry, emotionless voice. "I'm John McLean, a ranger from the 70s. That year, something happened that should never be told. We built Vault 9 to imprison someone. Not a murderer, not an animal. Something else. A creature that looked human, but wasn't. It could read minds. It hid itself in your memories. It could be the voice of your loved one, or the voice of the child you never had." The tape died down. There was the sound of wind in the speaker, and then a knock. Knock, knock, knock. The recorder turned off on its own. And behind me, the same knock on the bunker door. As I passed through the door, there was no more sound. It was as if the blows were just to let me know. I was seen. I went inside to the wall at the back of the bunker, the same place where I had first sensed something behind it. I examined the wall with the torch. There were some old wooden planks on it. I scratched them with my fingernail, dirt and mold falling. You could see the hammer marks on the back. A wall built, not to hold up a roof, to hide something. I found a rusty axe next to the old stove. I picked it up and started hammering on the wood. The first blow echoed through the room. The second blow cracked the wood. The third blow, the plank broke. The torchlight fell into the dark hole behind it, and the smell of something very old and dead came out. Behind it, there was an empty space. A small room. No, I should say a cell. I went inside. The floor of the cell was scrawled with strange symbols. The walls were full of scratches, as if someone had been writing on the wall with a fingernail for years. And in the middle of the cell, there was a metal chair with chains. But the chair was not empty. A dried and crumpled figure was sitting on the chair, something like a human, but its head was too big. It was as if something was moving under its skin. Its mouth was open, and inside its mouth, a severed tongue had fallen to the floor. I was out of breath. I moved closer. On the wall behind the chair was a sentence written in blood or red paint. I gave up my tongue, but my mind is still with me. My eyes were fixed on that sentence when suddenly the torchlight flashed, and the chair was empty. I turned back. The light fell on the floor of the cell. Footprints. Footprints that ended behind me. And right at that moment, from outside the cell, the wooden door of the shelter closed with a loud bang. I don't remember anything else from that night. I passed out from fear, and when I woke up, I was on the damp dirt outside the hut. I don't know who or how brought here. I got up and sat up, but my head was dizzy as if I had been hit in the head, but I don't remember anything. Anyway, I got up and ran out of the forest, no matter how hard it was. I never went back to that forest, but the nightmares of that night won't leave me.